Okay, Mr. President, Mr. Secretary, you could be president if you want. I'm here.
Yeah, for 2 months.
You're not on mine.
You're mine. Now I am.
On.
Oh.
All right, I'll put it closer.
Marge,
Here,
Bart. Here. Jim there. Nellie,
here,
Candy,
here,
Kathy,
here,
Nancy,
here,
Dave, Barbara,
here,
Beth,
here,
Bev,
here,
Joe, Scott.
here.
All here, all present.
Okay, so we have a quorum. The agenda has gone out to the board. Are there any changes to the agenda? If not, I'll entertain a motion to accept. Joe moved to accept. Do I have a second?
Second.
Candy seconded. Those in favor signify by raising a hand. Unanimous. Okay. President's report is short and sweet. I want to thank you all for coming and listening and providing us with your input and I appreciate those that send me emails. Well, not always appreciate them, but I do appreciate some of them. No, I do appreciate hearing from you. Today, when we have an issue, I will open it for you to give us feedback on that particular issue. At the very end is when we open it if you have other comments that you would like to make for the board. I want to thank the board for everybody showing up today. Isn't that wonderful? We're all here. And we just came out of an executive session, so it's been a long day. So that's my report. Next is the CEO report.
Thank you. I will try to be brief. Got a couple updates on some of the projects that are in work and in process. We've been looking at doing an artisan shop expansion, a membership services expansion here in the lobby, and then the metal shop expansion, which is right over here. We are getting those teed up. We're ready to go for bid on, I think, all of those. So within a week or two, we should be out for bid on those. That'll be open for 4 to 6 weeks, probably closer to 4 weeks, where we hope to get some good bids for those projects. Our goal is to get to at least 3, and then we'll develop a recommendation for the board and come back to the board probably in March, unless we want to do a special meeting, but in February. I don't know that we'll be done by the end of February to get those bids in, but we might. And once those contracts are approved, then those projects can move forward. Ideally, we're looking to start those projects in April, because that's generally when things start to slow down a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit. So we don't like to do a lot of big projects usually here during the very high peak season, which is generally January to April. So those are moving forward, which is great. Similarly, the Desert Hills locker room expansion, recall that that is coupled with the above ceramics kiln room, bringing that room up to code, and then also shoring up the joists. Since the locker room is the lower level of the kiln room, we have to get into the ceiling of the locker room to improve those joists, which are in the floor above that. So we're hoping to start that project in about April. We've had a lot of discussions about the Desert Hills pool. We have a pool expert contractor that is going to be mapping out construction documents on how to improve the system, the piping, the pumps, the filters, et cetera. So that project has actually already started. Once he's finished with that, we'll be able to look at his findings and his recommendations and see what level of work actually needs to be done. Again, at this point, there has been a lot of talk, are we going to have to replace that pool? We're thinking we're not, and that this probably is going to just be some maintenance, repair, and replacement equipment, which would be great. Other things, we've had ongoing discussions with the Pickleball Club. Remember that the Pickleball Club has offered to pay for some additional courts for this next calendar year. So we're in conversations with the Pickleball Club on really identifying what the scope of that is, what's the ideal location for some additional courts, et cetera. So that's moving forward. At some point, we're hoping that we can bring an MOU between GVR and the pickleball club forward that really just lays out what the expectations are. The club will pay for these. It's a memorandum of understanding.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking. Yeah, good question. So that really, it's just, it lays out really what the scope and the expectations are of each of the parties so that it's very clear and on paper so that there's no ambiguity or questions. So we've got a draft and we're passing around a draft. The club itself is still having discussions on really what the scope is that we want to be looking at. We've already met with the architect that designed the pickleball center originally. That was with WSM, Kristen DeBone, if you recall. We've had conversations with her. She's ready to go to do basically an updated master plan for the pickleball center, maybe taking a look at Canoa Ranch. We know that Canoa Ranch, since it backs up to some residential properties, is going to be more problematic because it's going to have to include a lot of sound mitigation. So those are just some of the things that we're working on, some of the projects that are being teed up. Everything's gonna go in about April or May, so it's gonna be a little busy around here. So any questions? All right. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Scott. David, you're gonna do a quarterly financial for us?
I am going to do that. Okay, the presentation I'll be giving is included in your packet. It starts on page 3. But this is the quarterly board level financial report. And it's interesting that it's the fourth quarter because when it's fourth quarter, you get a full year's worth of data. So this is a pretty interesting and good
Thank you.
report. Okay, for starters, we compare our total revenue to budget. The total budget for 2024 was 11,972,000, and we came in at 11,636,000. Doesn't sound like we're off very much, but it's really important to look at what I talk about every quarter is this capital revenue. You can see that our actual revenue for the capital revenue was 2,428,000, which is $611,000 under budget. So we had a very challenging year with regards to our revenue. But I think these financials show some pretty good performances. So the reason that the entire total revenue isn't as negative as the capital revenue is that if you see under the recreation section, we came in $300,000 over budget, and that was great. And that's kind of what I report every quarter as well, is that the activity level is more than we expected, and the revenue from that is more than we expected. But as you're going to see, so are the expenses. So that's the revenue side. And this illustrates it better graphically. I know it's hard to see all those numbers, but if the red bar is 100% of budget, and you can see right off the bat, there's one line item of revenue that's way above budget, and that is that recreation line item that I talked about. Let's find the capital revenue. It's the third bar in. Capital revenue makes up 25% of our budget, and yet, we had a significant, almost 20% shortfall with that revenue. Now on the expense side, which is some good news, I'll go to the largest variance right in the middle. You see program expenses our expenses were 43.7 above budget, and that relates back to that income that we talked about just a moment ago. The other item that's significant is the personnel line item that we spent $5,573,000. That's 4.5% above budget. And it's worth noting that what we did was we brought some outsourced activities back in-house, and we're paying that through our payroll, custodial primarily. So again, graphically, if you look at the graph, try to look for the variations, you can see again, the expense that's 142% of budget is program expense, and that's what we've talked about. Personnel actually, percentage-wise, is very close to being on budget. But you see a big gap over here. It says non-reserve capital projects. And you can see that we spent very little on that. And that's because, as I've reported before, we knew that there was going to be a shortfall in the housing portion of our revenue, and we hit a pause on these non-reserve capital projects, and I'm glad we did. And then finally, and here's an important report that I don't know what page it is in your book, but it's that you want to at least look at a little bit, is the calculation of our surplus. While again, we were $611,000 under budget in our capital revenue, when you go to the very bottom line, which takes into account adjustments for funding of designated funds and in separating what is operating from designated fund activities, we ended up with a deficit of 219,871. Now, I need to make a public statement right now. Everything that I'm giving to you today is preliminary. We haven't officially closed the books. We haven't officially been through the audit. We don't see anything that's going to make these numbers change materially yet, but I just want to make sure that you understand that these numbers may change. But in my opinion, suffering a $611,000 deficit in one line item on the revenue and still coming in at $219,000 deficit for total operating is a fairly good story. I wish it wasn't. I wish it was all positive numbers. One thing I'm going to leave you with, well, yeah, I'm going to leave you with this at this point, but I'm going to talk about the board.
David?
Yes.
We don't have that one.
You don't?
Does anybody else have it?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's page 3.
I've got it.
It's page 3. It's a little confusing. It doesn't say surplus at the top.
It's
Yeah,
like part of that.
It's down below. Below.
it's the bottom section of page 3. Thank you for helping me clarify that. But I'm going to share something with you.
Okay, got it.
Has everybody found it?
Yeah.
That's not it.
It's on the
So
bottom.
we're talking about the deficit and about capital revenue. We're in the middle of January, I guess you know that, but it already looks like our tracking of house sales show that we're on track to receive 69 homes for the month of January, and our budget is 57. So for the first time in a long time, we're going to meet and actually beat our budget. Don't want to count my chickens too soon, but it's a good way to start the year off. The last time we met our budgeted home sales was in May of 2013.
Wow.
One month doesn't make a trend, but I sure hope it is. Question?
What's the normal for January?
Well, our budget, it was 57 homes. And that was with a lean, our budget for 2025 is pretty lean. By lean, I mean, we really want to meet these projections of home sales. But January is usually around 57 or 60 homes.
Okay.
And the critical months are March, April, and May. Those are the biggest months.
So David, are you seeing the same trend as last year then?
Well, all I have is 1 month.
1 month.
And,
Okay.
and I will tell you that even December was, while it was not up to budget, it was trending in the right direction.
Okay.
So I don't even know if you still can call it a trend yet, but I'm kind of optimistic.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Let's see, I talked about the surplus. Okay, this is the one time, this report, I don't know what page it is on, but it's our statement of financial position. It's on page 6. The one number that I think is prudent that we talk about is operating cash. You can see that for December 31st, of 2024, just a few weeks ago, our operating cash is 4.6 million. But if you go back a whole year and look at December 31st of 2023, the operating cash was 6,066,000. That's a 1,443,000, I'm sorry, $1,443,000 decrease in our operating cash. So that's worth talking about. What we found was in December, as I always am saying, we become cash rich in December. We start getting our dues payments. But the rate that we got the dues payments in the last 2 weeks of December was actually less than it was the year before. And I'm pleased to report that I look at the first 2 weeks of January and that cash receipts are more. So it truly is a timing difference. And I would add to it that, we did have a deficit of a couple $100,000. That added to that operating cash deficit as well. But that's unique and important to know. And this is what FAC does. They go through this in pretty good detail. So I feel pretty good about where our cash is. I'll be really interested to see where we end up at the end of January. I just transferred $1.4 million out of this Chase operating cash into our JP Morgan investment account. So we're careful to manage our cash and get it to where we can get some return on it, okay? And then finally, what sort of reinforces what I just said is a quarterly scorecard of our investment returns. The top section is for designated funds, and you can see that it ranges from the MRRB pools. We actually beat our benchmark by a bit, by getting 7.7% return, where our benchmarks are 7.3. So we beat it there. There's another one that's the emergency fund. We actually came in a little bit under our benchmark at 13.3 instead of 15.6. But personally, I'm really tickled to see that 13.3. And you can see down in the lower section, which is our operating cash investments, you'll see that it's showing returns that are acceptable to the investment committee's benchmarks. Okay, I hope that wasn't too long and boring, but that's the presentation for the fourth quarter of 2024 preliminary financial statements.
Okay, thank you, David. Does anyone want him to send them his PowerPoint? Does anybody need it? We okay? Okay. Thank you, David. That was very well done. I have a question. On the emergency fund, it has 635,469. Is that correct? Did the board pass something that said we were going to hold it at 500,000?
Yes, ma'am. We did. And we did that. My understanding is we're going to do that as of December the 31st. So now we have that number, and you'll see in the FAC work papers that I projected a $135,000 transfer out
And
of
where does it go?
out of emergency and into initiatives.
Okay.
And that's part of our
Okay.
plan for the year. Good
Okay.
question.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions for David? Now that I've lost mine. No other questions. Okay, thank you, David. That was great. Committee reports, audit, Nancy?
Really nothing to report just yet. The audit is ongoing, and we'll probably get a draft to go over in end of March or April.
Okay, same auditor as last year?
Yes.
Madam Chair, your question for the audit, we have it scheduled at our end of March for the audit presentation. So the audit schedule, does that allow for us to have an audit committee for the completion of the audit sometime in mid-March?
David?
That would make sense.
Okay, thank you.
We were hoping to have it prior to, when we had it last year. It was just too tight. So we've asked the auditor to try his best to get it to us before the end of March.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Board Affairs, Bart?
Thanks. We had our really exciting meeting in January, just about a week ago. And we discussed some possible proposed tentative changes to the bylaws. Obviously, ultimately, those changes will be up to the membership as a whole, not to the board, but it'll be up to the board to decide whether to put that on the ballot. Really, I would say too preliminary at this point to merit a lot of discussion here, since the soonest that they would go on the ballot presumably would be in 2026. We were going to talk about something that is always of interest here in GVR, and that's guest pass policy. But that got deferred to our March meeting because our subject matter expert on that was not available. But that'll be, I think, an interesting meeting for BAC in March if your threshold for determining something to be interesting is pretty low. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Bart. Fiscal Affairs, Nellie?
We had our committee report and went over extensively the year-end statements that David presented here today. Just a couple of extra comments on those as we look at what's coming in January. And if you remember our budget that we passed for 2025, we were intentionally conservative on our home sales. And so our home sales projected for 2025 is at 863. And we ended up in 2024 at 831. So we only need 30 home sales for the entire year, which is a conservative number, I believe. The other thing impacting our 2024 home sales, if you remember, there was a state law change in September. So it was difficult to project as we were going into it. So it's something that we'll continue to monitor. On your calendar for February, we've spent the past 3 months looking at our reserve funds, both for the Part A facility maintenance and for our pools. And we'll be coming in with recommendations and hopefully our consultant presentation in February. And that's it.
Okay. You want to do investments?
Sure. Always good to report good news. We had our year-end report from our investor managers, both Corient and JP Morgan, and it has been as presented in your slides. We are right at our projected returns for all of our funds, and it was a very good year. As you look at the year-end summary, the first 3 quarters were real gangbusters as far as the returns. However, the fourth quarter, we saw some uncertainty that our investor managers talked about. And I think if they were to look into the future, it's just a word of caution because of a lot of the uncertainties that we're seeing, perhaps in our inflation mortgage rates as we go into calendar year 2025. And so you may see us be a little bit more conservative in management of those ranges in our investment policy.
Okay, and that will happen? The investment?
The investment managers manage that. They have the
Okay.
authority to manage the ranges.
Great, thank you. Nominations and elections, where is
That's-
she?
That's
Candy?
me.
There she
Yes,
is.
ma'am. Thank you. This is a busy time for nominations and elections because it's nominations and elections time. So we've had quite a few things to discuss. We met last Thursday. Our last meeting was last Thursday, which was January 9th. And at that time, we did present and approve our candidates who are running for the board in 2025. And I'd like to announce their names now, and several are here. We'd like to proudly announce the 6 candidates running for the GVR Board of Directors, and they are Beth Dingman, April Hassan Hillard, Dale Howard, Lanny Smith, Steve Reynolds, and Jody Walker. And if those of you that are here, if you could please stand so We can acknowledge you. Beth, you're here. Thank you. There are very, very good list of candidates to vote for. We also, at our last meeting, we talked about different questions that could be considered for the two forums that are coming up next month. So we decided upon those questions. We also discussed procedures for voting for those GVR members that needed to come into a center in order to vote on computers. And so we talked about that. And that's going to be at the West Center. And then we're talking about extending our voting timeline, which was going to run until March 15th in order to extend that a few more days to help out with any kind of the mail-in voting process. So we're going to talk about that further in our consent agenda under 7C. But again, welcome to the candidates. We wish you well, and we know that you will be a wonderful addition to the board whoever elected.
Okay.
Thank
And
you.
next year we elect 3.
3, that's right. 4 will be cycling off, and then we'll vote for 3 to come on, and the voting begins on February 19th and runs until March 18th. If we change it, that is correct.
Okay, so
If you agree
4
to
off,
extend the
3 on.
window.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Planning and evaluation, Jim?
Well, we had our final meeting on August 29th, at which time we made our recommendation for capital plan and forwarded it to FAC.
August?
And we're done.
Okay.
FAC.
August
Yeah,
29th,
that's a-
got it.
What's that? There was,
And that's the last meeting that you'll have then?
well, that, yeah,
Okay. All right, the next section is called the consent agenda, and the consent agenda items are routine items of business that are collectively presented for approval through a single motion. A board member may request that an item be pulled from the consent agenda and placed under action items for separate discussion and action. So do I have anyone that wants any changes? You will note on here, under C, Board Business, Barbara is stepping down from, where is she? There she is. From Chair of Nominations and Elections, and she's got Candy who will step up into that position, so. And also.
Actually, I will be laying down.
Yes, she's having surgery and she can't run nominations and elections from her hospital bed, so. And then there's a recommendation to extend the voting to March 18th. So that's under the consent agenda. Do I have any changes to the consent agenda? All right, I need a motion to accept. Kathy? Do I have a second? Bev? Okay, we have a motion made by Kathy and seconded by Bev to approve the consent agenda. Those in favor signify by raising a hand. Unanimous. Great, thank you very much. Okay, action items. The first action item is the Board Affairs Committee recommendation to change the corporate policy manual, the smoking and vaping policy. Bart, were you going to do this?
Sure. I'll be brief since we talked about this a fair amount at the work session on the 8th of this month. Smoking has been prohibited in GVR buildings for a long time. But recently, for various reasons, it's been proposed that we ban smoking everywhere on GVR property, whether it's indoors or outdoors. And there is a very broad support for that. There was a member survey several months ago that you may remember that showed broad support for that. And essentially, as things progressed, the question became, what about vaping? There is no scientific evidence yet that secondhand vaping outdoors is harmful. So there seemed to be a consensus of the board at our work session on the 8th that maybe it would make more sense to ban smoking anywhere on GVR property, but still permit vaping under certain rules about distance from buildings and designated areas. So all of that is summarized in the piece of paper that I'm having trouble finding. There it is, page 22 and 23 of the meeting book today. And the option that I just described that seemed to be the consensus of the board was option number 2. So I will go ahead and make that motion if I may. And then once the motion is out, and assuming there's a second, we can discuss it.
Okay, so you moved,
I'm
Do-
moving option number 2 specifically to approve a smoking ban on all GVR properties and allow vaping except within 20 feet of GVR entrances and on sports courts.
okay, and Jim seconded your motion. Now, do we have any discussion? Beth?
Can you tell me again, I've heard that people in the pickleball courts have been somewhat unhappy about vaping. And I don't know if anyone's gotten specific complaints. I just wondered, how widespread those complaints were or what they involved.
I have heard the same thing. Of course, the proposed ban would include a ban on our sports courts. So if anybody vaped on the pickleball or tennis or shuffleboard or bocce courts, they would presumably be told that that's not permitted. But I play tennis a lot, and I don't think I've ever seen anybody vape on the tennis courts. Beyond that, I don't know.
Okay, Candy?
My discussion is that you had shared what the GVR members had voted upon, and I think they voted upon no vaping and or smoking.
It's true, however, that survey consisted of a single question.
Okay.
And the question was, do you support banning smoking and vaping on GVR property? There was not an opportunity in that question for the respondents to the survey to separate out smoking from vaping.
Okay. And my other point is that, it took a long time before we figured out that regular smoking was bad for us as far as secondhand smoke goes. And I know there's not a significant amount of evidence out there saying that vaping, the vapors is contrary to our health as well, but I still kind of have that question. So I know that we kind of all agreed that to go ahead and just talk about banning smoking and allowing vaping within, I think, 20 feet or outside or something like that.
Except within 20 feet,
Okay.
right?
But me personally, I don't agree with that, but I will agree by whatever
Okay,
the board
thank
says
you.
about it. Thank you.
Beth?
My only observation is, that it may be easier for people not to vape at all than to get them to stay outside the 20-foot limit. This is from experience with one person that I know who vapes, but would never go any further than, right outside the door of the court. So I'm just wondering whether saying that there's no vaping at all might keep people from vaping when they're not supposed to, which seems
Okay,
easier for them.
We do have a motion on the floor to exclude vaping though, so unless you want to make an amendment to that motion? He's allowing vaping, yes. 20 feet, but
21
not
feet or
on
farther.
sports courts.
Yeah,
Okay,
but
anybody else have any questions of Bart?
I don't like that either.
Well, he didn't have to dance very prettily. Prettily. You like my word?
As to Candy's point, the only thing that I'll add is nobody has a crystal ball, so who knows what science in the future will show. But as to secondhand smoke, I think most of the health damage that is possible is caused by the products of combustion, particularly the particulates that come out of combustion. And with vaping, obviously there's no combustion there. There's just vaporization. So who knows? But it's one of those things that if evidence does arise, it would be pretty easy to change the CPM. Thanks.
Okay. Do we have any comments or questions from the members who are here? Step up to the microphone. No? Okay, those in favor signify by raising a hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 yes. Those opposed? 1, 2, 3. And that was Candy, you were opposed,
Yep, Kathy. and Dave.
Kathy and Dave. Okay, motion passed. Thank you. Thank you for all the hard work that your committee did on this, Bart. We had quite the conversation at our work session on this, so that's why they probably didn't have a lot to say today. So, the next one is to amend the corporate policy manual, part 1, 1.2.9A, facility fees. Scott, are you going to do this one?
I am, yeah, thank you. So November 13th, the board approved a slew of finance policies, and yours truly inadvertently left one little policy out of that request. So I found it after the fact and am bringing it before you again today, not again, but for the first time, and asking you to consider amending the CPM one more time concerning finance policies.
Scott, you have a page number where you're at?
25 is the staff report.
Thank you.
Yep. So section 1.1.1A2 says that the GVR administration is authorized to establish and modify operational fees, including facility fees. However, section 1.2.9A says the CEO will implement a board-approved fee schedule for rental of GVR facilities. These two provisions are inconsistent. Staff is then therefore recommending that the first sentence of subsection A be stricken, and that is illustrated for you on page 27. That's the very first sentence. It says the CEO will implement a board-approved fee schedule for rental fees. And if you go back to the previous page, I have a note there under other fees, facility fees. It says these fees are established, well, in the comments, we've got GVR administration approves those fees, except in this other provision, it says that the board approves the fees. So it seemed like it would just be much easier to remove that sentence out of 1.2.9. Does that make sense to everyone? Can I answer any questions for you?
One section says the board does it, and the next section says the staff does it.
That's right.
So you want to take the section out that says the staff does it.
The
Is that
board
right?
does it,
You want to take it out that the board does it.
right. So I'm sorry, if you look on page 26 again, number 2 under, it's A2. I'll read it to you. The authority to establish and modify operational fees is delegated to GVR administration as part of the ongoing day-to-day management of the organization.
Okay,
And then if you look under there are 4 subsections, A, B, C, and D. B is facility fees.
okay,
But when you go to rentals and fees, it says the CEO will implement the board-approved fee schedule for rental fees, rental of facilities. So again, on one hand, it says GVR administration's responsible for it. The next provision says the CEO will implement the board-approved fee schedule. So they're incongruous.
okay.
So we're asking to be consistent by removing the first
Removing-
sentence in 1.29,
0.9 on page 27.
page 27.
Okay,
Madam Chair,
let's put a motion on the floor.
I move approval of the amended section to delete the 1.2.9 as reference.
Okay, do I have a second? Beth? Okay. All right, Nellie made a motion to delete that section, that first sentence in that section A, and Beth seconded it. Now, is there any discussion by the board? Or any questions of Scott? Beth?
So, do you need to say again in 1.2.9 that the CEO sets the fees as well as waive them? I
No,
mean,
I
it's
don't-
already said over in 1.1.2, but I didn't know whether this was a new section.
I don't think so,
Okay.
only it's, the sections exist already, and the provision in, where it says the GVR administration is responsible for setting those daily operational fees, I think it covers it there more than enough.
Madam Chair, I think it's listed in item number 2. It says authority to establish and modify. So
Exactly.
that's setting the fees.
Okay, anybody else have any questions of Scott? Anybody out here have anything, any input for us or comments? Okay. Those in favor of the motion signify by raising a hand. Is that unanimous? It is, right? Okay. Thank you. All right, the action item C is to award a contract for the architectural services for the lapidary expansion. Scott?
Yeah, thank you. If you recall, back in September 25th of this year, the board had a pretty extensive work session and followed by a regular meeting to talk about which option to pursue concerning the expansion of the lapidary and/or woodworking space here at West Center. The board at that time elected to follow option 1, which was to separate a big project into 2 projects, woodworking and lapidary, and actually include expansion of the artisan shop in the lapidary piece. Because the funds for moving forward with acquiring an architect to begin the actual construction document process, we need the board to consider approving this architect. We went out for bid for multiple architects. We received 3 bids. They're in your packet. Burton and Associates came in as the apparent low bidder. We've worked with them on the Metal Arts project. I've been really happy with them. Their bid came in at around $45,000. The other 2 came in closer to $85,000. So we have worked with all 3 of these architects so far and are happy with all of them. We have found that Burton is a little bit more of a local boutique type architectural firm. They're smaller. I don't think they have quite as many bells and whistles, but we don't need them. So staff is recommending that the board consider awarding a contract for Burton and Associates. Let's see here, in an amount of $49,500 as a base fee, with a potential allowance beyond the base fee of $4,500 for possible construction estimating, which we don't think we're going to need, but you never know. And with that, I'll answer any questions that you might have.
Okay, let's put a motion on the floor and take a motion. Kathy?
I'll move to make the motion to award the contract to Burton and Associates for architectural services in an amount of $49,500 for a base fee with an allowance beyond the base bid of $4,500 for possible construction and estimating services.
Okay, do I have a
Second.
second? Nellie? Okay, we have a motion made by Kathy to award the contract to Burton and Associates for architectural services, the amount of $49,500 for a base bid fee with allowance beyond the base bid of $4,500 for possible construction, estimating services, and a second by Nellie. Discussion by the board. Any questions of Scott? Bev?
Can't hear.
Can't hear you.
Sorry, I forgot. In case, say, their final expenses come in at, or look like they're gonna be higher, like say 60,000, for example, do you have to come back to the board for
We
approval again? or is
would,
that
we would have to come
happen?
back,
Okay.
sure. I don't think that'll happen, but we would have to come back.
It seems like a no-brainer.
Appreciate that. That was our opinion.
Okay, any other questions of Scott? Do you have a comment?
I do, just a quick one. I want to thank you all for this. I know the Lapidary Club thanks you for this. This has been a 20 to 30-year process. And this is another step closer. And sometimes it feels like there's just a constant barrage of steps, but this is a good one because this really allows the architect to start meeting with the Lapidary Club to really dive in and put together the programming and the needs and the expectations. Once that is done, they'll be able to really develop those construction documents. As I said, we then go for permitting. We then have these great documents that we can go out for bid. So the next time we'll be coming back to the board is when we, once again, hopefully have at least 3 bids. We'll do a formal RFP and we'll come back and recommend that the board award a contract for that contractor so we can actually start the construction project.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just a little bit of history, if you weren't at all of these meetings, this whole thing started with Lapidary needing more space so we could bring the Desert Hills group down here and combine them with the West. And then the wood shop needs more space. So we started with both of them, right, Scott? And then decided that the costs for that and the staff time and everything else involved, the wood shop said they would wait a
They did.
year.
They did.
Was it a
Well,
year?
We're looking
Oh,
at 2 years, so
years.
it'll probably be 27 when that
So,
project.
so they'll have some time to decide how they want to add. If they add on at all, they'll be going into the back parking lot. And they've already checked with the county and, that's been kind of tentatively approved. But this one would be, Scott, this is to go out on this
Or
side.
this would expand the Lapidary to the south side toward GVR Drive.
So we'll go
And a little
towards
bit
the-
expansion, right,
Towards the driveway, towards the walkway,
correct. That's correct.
not around the corner though.
Not so much around the corner. Right,
Okay.
that's correct.
Okay. So any questions for Scott? Anyone out here have a question or a comment, please? Is it
Just
on?
You have to get close to it.
I don't
Oh,
think
it's
it's
still
on.
not on. Is there a little button you can turn on?
Wait,
Hold on, IT's on its way.
it has to be on the tape, Jody.
Okay, is that better?
Yeah.
Question on this contract, is it firm fixed price, cost plus fixed fee? When you award it, you know what kind of contract type?
It's a
you're doing?
fixed rate. It's
Fixed.
just a fixed fee of 49.5.
So it's firm fixed price then?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's great.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, we have a motion on the floor to award the contract to Burton and Associates for 49,500 with with 4,500 possible construction estimating services. Those in favor signify by raising a hand. It's unanimous. Okay, the Fiscal Affairs Committee recommendation for approval for the Capital Improvement Program Finance Political Change in the CPM. Nellie, were you going to handle this?
I will just introduce it and then have Scott explain the changes. This is one of 3 changes in our fiscal policies that we brought forward in this, Pastor, it's on page 36. And we separated it out because it had been a pilot program before. And now we're moving it with the improvements that we learned through the pilot. We're instituting the changes and putting them into place. So I'll have Scott walk through the explanation of it.
Sure, thank you very much. For those of you, and I've lost my place, but for those of you that may recall, back in September of 23, the board approved a pilot program. And it was in place for at least a year, but as we were putting together that budget for 24, and then certainly the budget for 25, we were already looking and using different criteria, different updates, just from the feedback that we had heard from members, from board members, from staff on how the pilot program could be improved. So what you have before you now are those improvements. You can see the red line starting on page 53, and it is extensive because there is quite a bit of new language that has been added. The stricken language is the language that was either stricken from the existing pilot program or the existing policy, and the red underscore is the new language. It looks like there's quite a bit of red. In the end, if you want to see the clean version, it's on the bottom or page 58. Essentially, it describes what a capital improvement program and capital budget are. It talks about the policy and the process. It identifies the difference between a type 1 and a type 2. This is consistent with the pilot program that's already in place. A type 1 capital item is an item that wasn't budgeted, and that normally in a year where there's actually money to use for capital, which isn't this year, the board would approve, say, $80,000 to $100,000 for items that may come up throughout the year. We didn't have the ability to do that this year because we didn't have enough. But essentially, that's what a type 1 capital project is based on this policy. A type 2 are more like the things that are bigger. They're initiatives type projects. They're the expansion of Lapidary, Metal Shop, the West Center lobby expansion projects. They're planned. There's those types of things. So this lays out really the definitions of each of those. It talks about an assessment, how each one of the projects that's submitted has to go through an assessment. And then there's a process to follow for a type 1 and a type 2 capital project when you're doing those assessments. We talk about project planning on the end, which is page 61. And we are in January, and we are beginning these projects. We've actually started a few projects that started in 24 that have rolled over, and I mentioned those today because we're teed up and ready to go for a few projects in probably April. The one that you just approved with Lapidary, this is really following this process because we're hitting the ground running. We're hiring an architect after the first of the year. They're going to do their part of putting together design, and we're hoping to be able to come back to the board, hopefully in May or June, to award a contract for an actual contractor that would actually put some shovels in the ground. We're hoping in July. This talks about prioritizing projects based on whether it's essential and it's important, or do we really need it now, or maybe we can put this off a little bit. And then a miscellaneous section, which is on page 62, talks about financial forecasting when putting together the CIP. So we always want to make sure we're looking at our cash flow, and we want to be able to project and identify as best we can on certain assumptions what that is. Carry over funds from one capital project from one year are put into the next year's capital budget. Now, that's a big piece that we worked with the FAC on pretty extensively, because there were some questions previously about, well, if the board approved a budget in, say, 22, and there were funds available for a project in 22, and that project doesn't get completed in 22, does the project have to reappropriate those funds in 23? There was a lot of question with the FAC and discussion about it. If the project is already started, for example, it really wouldn't be appropriate to have to ask the board to reappropriate funds for a project that is actually already started. So the FAC recommended no. If the board has already approved those dollars in one fiscal year and that project isn't completed in that fiscal year, then that rolls over to the next. And so when we're asking the board every year to approve that budget, we would show that on the document where it's rolled over from one year to the next. It's a little complicated, but the nice thing is it lays out a very clear policy. We didn't have a policy before to follow a process. This lays out a policy and a process, which is it's dependable, reliable. We can follow it. It gives us staff a bright line in the sand on exactly what we're supposed to do. So we're recommending that you move forward with this. I think it's a much better product at the end of the day than the capital pilot project that was approved in 23.
Okay, so we went from let me make sure that everybody understands. We approved the staff to try this because there was nothing, there was no policy set up, correct?
Yeah, in 23, that's what happened.
So they've worked with it throughout all of 24, made some adjustments.
23, yeah, 20, all of 24,
All of
exactly.
20, some of 23?
Sure.
I think it was some of 23, and all of 24, and then we said we'll come back and decide if we want to make it permanent. So I'm assuming that's where you want to go with this, is to make it permanent?
It is. So what we're recommending is that these changes be included in the CPM
Okay,
going forward.
okay, questions? Beth?
Um, two questions. First is, you never really did a pilot project for the capital ones, the ones, the small projects, right? So has that actually never happened as an actual thing, right?
That's true. Unfortunately, yeah, in 24, we did have to put a pause on.
Right. So
spending
we
out of
don't
those
have
type
any
of
experience with how that worked,
Not with that specific type one.
type one project.
That's exactly right. We had done it in previous years before we actually had a policy, though.
Oh, okay.
So it had been done in practice before. There was just nothing on
Okay,
paper that was part of a CPM. So in practice, it had been done for quite a few years, actually.
Okay. So
Okay.
you feel confident that that's, that's gonna work?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's the way it was done more or less in the past, but there are clearer criteria now, so that it's an easier process to follow. The goalposts aren't moving every year.
And my other question is on page 56,
Sure.
it goes through the P&E and then the FAC. And I know we've had a lot of discussion recently about getting rid of the P&E committee. So that was my only other comment.
Yeah, our thought there is, if need be, if that does happen, we can always amend this proportion of the policy when that happens, because we're going to have to come back and amend the CPM if the P&E is eliminated anyway. So we could do that all at one time.
Okay, Kathy?
This isn't a correction or a question, but I'd like to point out a correction.
Okay.
On page 57, under miscellaneous,
Okay.
the wording in that is correct.
Okay,
And
good.
the FAC made a change to the minutes of December yesterday to reflect this wording.
Okay.
On the clean copy on
Uh-oh.
page 62,
Okay.
the wording is incorrect.
Okay.
So I just want to make sure we get the right one in. That's
Good to know. So let me make sure I see the wording. I see exactly, I know what you're saying. Was that,
okay. What if it's got on the third line,
okay,
estimated cost should is supposed to be shall.
okay,
Include inflation and then inserted or include, but not limited to was inserted. Inflation, planning and architectural fees, legal fees, permitting, and the word et cetera was taken out. The
Okay.
rest of it is the same.
so the sentence,
The sentence on 57 or the whole paragraph
Is
on
correct.
57 is correct.
okay, good to know. Thank you. You're always very good at finding those.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Madam Chair, you need to take the whole paragraph on page 57 as the correct one,
Right.
because the last sentence on the miscellaneous section on 62 is in wrong too. So I would just
Uh-oh.
advise taking the entire red line section.
We will do that.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Okay, so page 57 is
Is
the
correct. That's correct.
correct one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for that.
We have
Gotcha.
eagle eyes on the board.
You do.
It was started in FAC.
Yeah, no,
though.
you're
That's where it
absolutely-
started. So I had many discussions and
Mm.
many copies, and we just kind of got lost, but we finally figured it all out yesterday.
Okay, so, Scott, do you have anything else you want to tell us about this?
I
So we're-
don't think so.
We're going to go from
Questions?
having a policy that we said we're going to try, and the staff is now recommending with some changes that we make it part of this corporate policy manual,
That's correct.
and it becomes the regulations or the rules by which they'll follow. If there's any changes to that or things don't work, then he'll come back to us with those changes, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay, I need a motion.
Um,
Nellie,
I move approval of the changes in the capital improvement policy as presented.
okay, do I have a second? Joe? I was looking in that direction. So Nellie made a motion to accept the changes and Joe seconded those. Any other questions, any other discussion? Bev?
I'm sorry. Do we need to say accept the changes as amended because of that?
Okay. Is that okay, Nellie?
That's fine.
Okay. Nancy, do I need to have an amendment to that, or are we okay with that, the way it is? Okay. Okay, does anyone have any comments you'd like to make, or, not yet? From the audience? I got sidetracked over here. Okay, all right, all those in favor signify by raising a hand. Unanimous. All right, Scott.
Great, thank you.
So this section of our meeting is a time for the members to make your comment. Please limit your comments to 2 minutes. Is it 2 minutes, Nancy? Yes. Okay, 2 minutes. Speakers are asked to provide their name and GVR number. And it's a time for comments, not a time for questions and answers. So we're not going to answer you. But we'd like to hear from you. So anybody want to?
I'm Dan Stokes, president of the Lapidary Club. And my GVR number is 256473. And I just wanted to say thank you to the board for all your hard work. And we look forward to putting in our hard work to help make a successful project.
Great,
Thank you.
thank you.
My name is Dave Nelson and my GVR number is 263026. And that's probably the first thing I've really remembered today correctly. So I'm the vice president of the Lapidary Club and also an architect and a Lapidary Club member. And I wanted to say that first to thank the board, but also we've been working with Tom Fisher and Tim Yellica, who work with Scott on the, and they have been an absolute pleasure to deal with. They are terrific ambassadors for GVR, and we are really enjoying working with them. And we are super excited to be in a prominent location now at West Center, and we're going to do our best to make the most of it to sell the wonderful things that GVR offers. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for the compliment to our new project managers. Those are our staff that he's talking about. So anybody else? Well, it's nice to know we're making somebody happy. So, okay, if there are no other comments, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Who said that? Bart? Did somebody wake Bart up? I'll take a second. Jim beat you. Okay, Bart moved to adjourn. Jim second. Those in favor? Is it unanimous? Bev? It's unanimous. Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming to the meeting, and we